Hey, this is Bailey Leisure, and I'm back after a week break doing a 2018 Major League Baseball regular season recap video and also my predictions on the wild card round coming up. So to start off the season, I'm going to recap the regular season and who got in to the Major League Baseball playoffs as I'm recording this video. The wild card round starts today. So starting off in the American League East, the Red Sox were the most dominant team in Major League Baseball, winning well over 100 games, having the best record. They will have home field advantage throughout the American League playoffs into the World Series if they are to get there. They were just dominant. I mean, led by Mookie Betts and J.D. Martinez. They were just one of the best teams. The Yankees were not too far. They had 100 wins as well. A lot of wins for a wild card team. And if you look at the way the National League went, a lot of those American League teams, if they played the National League, they probably could have home field advantage, with the exception of, I think, the National League Central. But the Red Sox and the Yankees, they pretty much everybody else wasn't that as good in the American League East, except for maybe the Tampa Bay Rays, who were rebuilding. Moving on to the American League Central, the Indians, they were pretty much, they dominated a weak division. They were, the Twins were kind of a disappointment this year, definitely regressing. The Tigers were rebuilding, even though they were competitive for the first 2 months. The White Sox, a lot of people thought they were going to take a step in the right direction, and that wasn't the case. And then the Royals, basically, after selling off all their core players, they were done. Nothing more to say here. The Indians dominated. The American League West, it was surprisingly interesting this year. The Astros won over 100 games, 103 to be exact. But the Oakland A's, they were the surprise team this year, and they gave them a run for their money. But I think the Astros just too much star power, and but you got to give it to Oakland being really a surprise team this year. And they were, and they gave them some competition, but the Astros were able to hold on. The Mariners were competitive for most of the season up until those last 2 months, and it's kind of a disappointment for them as they were looking to end their long playoff drought. They have not made the playoffs since winning 116 games, which was a record in Major League Baseball for the regular season in wins, but they have not made the playoffs since 2001, so that's going to get extended for at least one more year. The Angels were kind of competitive for the first 2 months, but just not enough pitching help, which is a shame for guys like Mike Trout. And then the Rangers weren't really that good either. But the Astros are able to get into the playoffs again, which is not easy for a defending World Series champion. But they're going to be able to have the right to defend. Moving on to the National League East. The Braves were kind of another surprise team. It's a young team that was able to develop a lot more this year, really led by Ozzie Albies and Ronald Acuna Jr., those rookies. I mean, those guys are probably going to be possibly rookies of the year. And that was the big, and it helped some of their veteran players like Freddie Freeman and Nick Markakis, and Yankee Swanson was a pretty good shortstop for them as well. The Nationals, definitely a team that's kind of dominated the division the last couple of years. They were a huge disappointment this season, and going 82 and 80, they're probably going to lose Bryce Harper at the end of the year, and free agency in the offseason. The Phillies they took a step in the right direction, but I think bullpen woes is what killed them. And that was pretty much the National League East. The Marlins, best division probably in the National League Central. This division had to get decided by a tiebreaker that was decided yesterday. The Brewers and the Cubs, they went back and forth, and Milwaukee beat the Cubs yesterday 3-1. Really, that team was led by a lot of great players: Lorenzo Cain, Ryan Braun, the veteran guy. But I think the big name that helped him out was Christian Yelich, and his play in September especially. He's probably going to be the MVP this year. You got I mean, he was just, I mean, amazing for the Brewers, and that was the big difference. The Cubs, I mean, they led the division for most of the year, but it just went tight in that last week or so, and the Cubs, are going to have to play a wild card game today against a team for the National League West. I'll talk about. The Cardinals were competitive, but they kind of collapsed the last 2 weeks as well, and that was pretty much the National League Central. And then to recap the last division, the National League West, it's funny if you look at it. The Dodgers won the division for the 6th year in a row. They won a tiebreaker yesterday, 5-2 over the Rockies. Those two teams that had to play in the tiebreaker led the least in the division this year. I think the Arizona Diamondbacks, they had led the division most of the year. If you look at combined days, I think they led for over 150 days. So you got to think what happened. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the Dodgers, Manny Machado was definitely a big factor for them. Max Muncy, I think the big young pitcher they got, Walker Buehler, was definitely a huge difference for them, especially with Clayton Kershaw kind of having some injury issues. But he was Kershaw still had a pretty good year despite the injury issues. But Walker Buehler, I think, was the big X factor for them, and the reason why they won the National League West for the 6th year in a row. So now I'm going to talk about the most disappointing teams that came out of baseball this year. Starting off with the first team, first team I'm going to talk about is probably the Minnesota Twins. The Twins just, it's really disappointing for them considering they went from in 2016 they had 100 losses, and then in 2017 they had 100 wins, and they were a wild card team. They just regressed this year, and they kind of were big sellers at the deadline. They traded guys like Brian Dozier and Eduardo Escobar, big players for them the previous year. And I don't know what they're probably going to be rebuilding next year as well. It's kind of a disappointment for them considering they were a big surprise in 2017. Second team, I'm going to talk about the St. Louis Cardinals. I mean, they were kind of back and forth going into the All-Star break. They fired their manager. It looked like they were not going to, they could have been sellers. And in the trade deadline, they were kind of, sellers and kind of buyers. But in the August into, the first part of September, they were red hot. I mean, they were competing for the division again. They were a wild card team, really led by Matt Carpenter. And just those last 2 weeks, they just collapsed and missed the postseason again. I mean, for the 2nd year in a row within like a couple games. So it was definitely a big disappointment for them considering the expectations for the St. Louis Cardinals baseball. The third team I'm going to talk about, this was a bit of a shocker. The Arizona Diamondbacks. I mean, they were, like I said before, they led the division, the National League West, for most of the year. They really, I think the reason they did not make the playoffs this year was inconsistent hitting, the struggles they had in May, and just, they relied too much on the home run ball. I mean, they really only got consistency. I don't even really think any of the hitters were consistent. I mean, Paul Goldschmidt had a terrible May month, but he had a great June, July, and August, somewhat into September. David Peralta was definitely another big hitter, but I think what basically happened was for them, they just, the bullpen really was worn out and kind of collapsed. And I think the signifying that they were not going to be a playoff team was at the end of August into September, that 4-game series they had at Dodger Stadium. And, they won the first game of that series and then lost the next 3 to the Dodgers. Really, in all those games were heartbreaking fashion where they lost the lead late in the games, because of bullpen woes. And they just didn't, I think that was a momentum killer for them. I believe in momentum in sports, and I don't know what's gonna happen for them going forward. I mean, they're probably going to be rebuilding next year, considering they're going to lose some of their best players or long-time players like Patrick Corbin and AJ Pollock. So I just don't know what's going to happen. And then the final team, the Washington Nationals, you look at with all that star power, guys like Anthony Rendon, Max Scherzer. I mean, they had Gio Gonzalez, Bryce Harper, Daniel Murphy. I mean, you have you have debatably the best player in baseball. Next to Mike Trout. And he was kind of, he picked it up a little bit after the All-Star break, but he went in hitting like 220 into the All-Star break. And, he's probably going to, I wouldn't 100% rule it out, but I think he's going to command a lot of money in the offseason, and he's not going to be with the Nationals. And the Nationals, they were kind of sellers, not into the non-waiver trade deadline, but into the waiver trade deadline, they kind of sold. And, it's kind of a shame, too, because Max Scherzer had a really great year. But unfortunately, that just was not the case. Moving on to the up-and-coming teams that I think could potentially be playoff teams next year. The first team I'm going to talk about is the Tampa Bay Rays. They won 90 games this year in the American League East, a very tough division. And I got a feeling that they're going to be a surprise team, really a big factor. They have possibly the next big pitcher in baseball, Blake Snell. I think they have some great players and great prospects that could really help them out and be competitive within the next year or two. So there's some big things coming up for the Tampa Bay Rays. The Philadelphia Phillies are the next team I'm going to talk about. I mean, even though they had a disappointing finish, it was definitely a step in the right direction from going from a 100 loss team. I think in 2017 they were the worst team in baseball. They have Aaron Nola. I think that one of the best pitchers in baseball. He was one of the best. Rhys Hoskins is a great player. They're going to possibly be big spenders in the offseason, and they're looking at possibly, I don't know if they are going to be able to do this, but possibly targeting both Manny Machado and Bryce Harper in the offseason. So if they're able to get one of those big players, they possibly could be the front runners next year in the National League East. This might be a surprise team I'm going to pick, but I'm going to go with the Mets. Listen, Jacob deGrom had a really great season this year, and I think just for the Mets, they've just, the last 2 years, just injuries have really cost them, and they have talent to potentially be a great, be a good team and possibly competitive in the National League East. But I think with the Mets, it's, they have 2 great pitchers. If Noah Syndergaard can stay healthier next year, and the whole team can stay healthy next year, I think the Mets could potentially be competitive and compete for a wild card, maybe a dark horse in the National League East. This is another surprise team you might be surprised about, but I'm going to go with the San Diego Padres. They have some great prospects, and they won like 67 games or 66 games this year. And you look at the National League West, you're thinking, but I think a couple teams could be on the decline and they can move up a little bit in the division. Not necessarily compete, but get out of the last place. I think the Diamondbacks and the Giants are possibly teams that are going to regress next year, considering they're going to be losing free agents and another team's getting a lot older. But I think San Diego, if they can develop some pitching a little bit better, I think they have some decent bullpen pieces. I think Francisco Mejia, their catcher, I think he's a big prospect that they got after trading Brad Hand at the trade deadline. So San Diego, they could be able to get out of last place. And the final team I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go with the Angels. Listen, when you have Mike Trout, the best player in baseball, you're not going to be horrible. But I think basically, they have some pieces now, I think, at least in the hitting department, to build around them. They have Andrelton Simmons, who was pretty good this year, and Shohei Ohtani. They wanted him to be a hitter-pitcher, hybrid, but he had to have Tommy John surgery. But from looking at the reports, he could also be. He could still hit during this period, and which is what I think eventually he's gonna have to play just one position, and I just think he's probably gonna be a hitter in that lineup. But listen, for the Angels, you need to go out and get some pitching. Go out, get some starting pitching, and I think you'll be good, and you could potentially be a wild card contender. And now my predictions for who are going to win some of the top awards in baseball, starting off with the American League and the MVP. I'm going to go with Mookie Betts. I think he had a really great year. Could potentially be JD Martinez, but I think Mookie Betts was an all-around better player. But I'm going to go with him. In the National League, I'm going to go with Christian Yelich. I could have gone with some other players, but I just think what he was able to do for the Milwaukee Brewers and leading them to a division title and a playoff appearance for the first time since 2011, I think that's going to be that's a huge thing. I mean, the MVP is not really about. It's not wholly about what you do, what a team does, and if they make the playoffs now. But he definitely was a big factor, and he has the numbers to back it up as well. And then in the Cy Young race, in the American League, it could have been Chris Sale, but I feel like he was out for too long of a period to potentially get that. I think it's going to be Blake Snell from the Tampa Bay Rays, and really a big reason why they won 90 games this year. But he was definitely a dominant pitcher, and I think he could be, the next dominant pitcher. And then in the National League, I think with the numbers, with the strikeout numbers and the win-loss record, you think it's going to be Max Scherzer, but I'm going to go with Jacob deGrom just because of that ridiculous ERA, and if only the Mets could have, backed him up a little bit more, he would have had 15 to 20 wins. But look at that ERA. 171? It's amazing and incredible what he was able to do, and I have to go with him. To conclude the video, with the wild card games starting today, I'm going to predict them starting off in the National League with today's game. The Cubs over the Rockies. This is going to be a really big game. Obviously teams that just played yesterday for a tiebreaker. I think the Cubs are going to have John Lester on the mound, and I think he's going to be the big difference in this game for the Rockies. I think the key for the Rockies definitely pick up the bats more, And then in the ninth inning in that tiebreaker game, they were able to get some home runs off Kenley Jansen, so maybe that gets the bats going a little bit. But I think the key in this game, will be pitching, and I just think John Lester is just, that's going to be too much for those Rockies hitters. I think in Chicago, in a do-or-die game, I'm going to go with the Cubs. And then in the American League, this is a really good matchup, the Yankees versus the Oakland A's. I think the key for the Yankees in this game is your hitters, Aaron Judge and, Stanton and Gary Sanchez and all those type players, if they get on, if they can get some big flies, that's going to be the difference. For Oakland, I'm going to say their bullpen. I have a feeling if this game goes to a bullpen game, I kind of trust Oakland a little bit more than the Yankees. But I think the key in this game, I think, is just experience. The Yankees are a much more experienced team. They played in this game last year. They know what it takes to do to win. Oakland, I think, it's not quite there yet. But I'm going to go with the Yankees over the Oakland A's. And that's it for my video. As always, follow me on Twitter at BaileyLeisure96. If you like the video, click like. If you like the content on my channel, please subscribe. And leave your comments below in the comments section on what your thoughts were on the 2018 Major League Baseball regular season. Who do you think are going to win the awards? Who do you think are going to be the up-and-coming teams next year? And what are your picks for the wild card games? So leave your comments in the comments below. Check out tomorrow for my Week 4 NFL recap video, as I'm back with NFL videos this week. And tune in on Thursday as my Week 5 picks will be coming out as well. And also stay tuned later this week once the divisional rounds are set for Major League Baseball. I will have a video on that as well. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you all later.